solutions to the situations in Venezuela and Bolivia. Now, the Chinese president in particular said that mounting protectionism and threats on the world have eroded international trade and investment, weighing down global growth. And just to give you an idea of the power that these countries have, together they represent about 42% of the world population, 23% of global GDP, 30% of the geographical territory, and 18% of global trade. Now, at these bilateral meetings, one interesting topic is being discussed, and that's developing a joint payment system in order to eventually cut their dependence on the Western financial system. Well, joining me to discuss more on this, investigative journalist Ben Swann. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time with us. The countries that make up the BRICS bloc, they're also members of the G20. So what's the driving force behind ditching the dollar, given that they're also members of the G20?
Well, because the dollar is the world reserve currency, but does not represent or protect their economies in any way. Look, Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa, these are nations that look at themselves as being vitally important on the world stage, and yet are completely dependent on the US dollar, and therefore the carrot and stick analogy applies here. We give you a carrot if you're good, says the U.S., or we give you the stick if you're bad, in the form of sanctions, right? And so these countries have decided we're not going to be subjected to sanctions anytime the West, or specifically the United States, wants to punish us. And the only way to do that is to break their dependency on the global system and the dollar as the world's reserve currency.
So, Ben, the new development bank created back in 2014 by the BRICS members, it was literally established to counter the IMF bank. And be able to lend money to emerging economies. So far, it's approved 46 projects valued at $12 billion with a B. How significant is this, and do you think that this bank is fully competing on the world stage?
Well, it's not fully competing yet, but it absolutely will get there. I mean, I certainly see the growth that's taking place there, but that was really step one, was establishing this. Step two is what's being discussed now, which is the payment processing system. So really what they're competing with is the SWIFT bank system, right? So right now, if you're sending money overseas from a U.S. bank, you have to use, or any Western country, you use that SWIFT system that is set up in Belgium. And that prevents money laundering in theory and all that kind of thing. But what the BRICS nations are doing is saying, well, we don't need to use the SWIFT system because we don't want to be subjected again to U.S. sanctions, because if the U.S. is sanctioning you, you can't move money using that SWIFT system. So what's really interesting is, number one, they're creating a payment system that would go around SWIFT. But how do you do that when you have 5 major countries that all have their own currencies? And one of the ways they're doing that is by using possibly cryptocurrency to do that. That would translate their currencies into a single cryptocurrency that is then used through the system and then formulated, I guess, when it gets into their country, back into their own personal currency. So essentially, you're taking currency from one, sending it through as a cryptocurrency, and then back on the other end into transforming it into another currency. And that allows them, again, to get around this SWIFT system in a way that no one had really thought about in the past, because crypto already has all of those things in place.
Now, Russia in particular, they've been moving away from the U.S. dollar. In fact, in the last 5 years, Russia actually cut out almost half of its trade payments in U.S. currency, from 92% to about 50%. So what does this say about its relationship, if any, with the West?
Well, I think it says that, again, that Russia specifically really started pushing this after 2014, right? Because in 2014, the U.S. started hitting Moscow with sanctions, and they wanted to punish. And remember how this works. Sanctions are issued against individual countries. They're also issued against leaders in those countries or wealthy people in those countries. And so when leaders in those countries and wealthy people in those countries start getting hit with sanctions, you have a choice. You can either go along with this and comply, or you can say, let's create a system that no longer gives you leverage over us. Well, one thing that the U.S. is doing a very poor job of right now is recognizing that it's not just Russia or just China, but there are 5 major nations and dozens of smaller nations that are very excited about the idea of no longer being under U.S. dominance when it comes to currency, and we're not doing anything about it. At this point, the U.S. is resisting on almost every level any push to change the way the system is currently, because it works for us, but it's not going to stay that way. This new system, this new way of handling currency is inevitable.
And speaking of currency, we're going to see you later today on Boom Bust at 4 p.m., correct?
That's right. Lots to talk about today.
All right. Investigative journalist Ben Swann, thanks so much for taking the time of your busy day to talk to us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Farron, thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.